Parenting is bad for your health. Parenting, all the data's out, and it's not good for you. So for those of you who are parents this morning, sorry about that. Maybe for some of you, should have made that clearer, but parenting is bad for your health, or at least that's according to the recent report given by the U.S. Surgeon General. If you're a parent, the chances are you're experiencing greater health risk compared to the non-parenting population. In fact, the most recent data suggests that 48%, so basically half of parents, say that most days their stress is, quote, completely overwhelming, compared to 26% among other adults. When they list in these reports what it is that's so overwhelming and stressful, here's what they mention. Financial strain. How do you have money to raise the children? There's economic instability and poverty all kind of mixed together to make parenting really hard. There are, of course, the time demands. Evidently, you have to continue to work to earn money, and you have children too, so how do you do that? The time demands are significant. Obviously, technology and social media are constantly changing. How do you integrate that and use that and expose your children to that in ways that are helpful and not harmful, if at all? And of course, there's your kids' health, helping your kids, and how do you deal with health issues that pop up with your kids or your own health as you're raising your kids? There's children's safety that is significant. This past week, we got a call from our school, one of these immediate calls, that said that there was a person with a gun out in front of our kids' school, and they locked the school down. They sent an email back saying, "Oh, it's fine, we got him." And I talked to the kids after school. It's like, "Hey, did you have lockdown today?" And they're like, "Yeah, some guy with a gun or something, but it's fine." Just then moved on. I did not move on. Parents, children's safety. And then in parenting, they also mention parental isolation. Like this profound feeling of loneliness that if you have kids, you're sort of raising your kids on your own. Of course, we experience this, I think, to a magnified effect here in Denver. Many of us moved from somewhere else, so these natural support systems we don't have quite as much here. Some of us are lucky, have recruited parents and grandparents to come and help, but many of us raise our kids essentially with just basically it feels like on alone. So there's isolation, and because of that, there's this extreme feeling of loneliness. So you add all those things together, and according to science and the latest data, parenting is hard and hazardous. Now, thankfully, though, if you're a parent today, what you have that other parents of other generations didn't have, what you have right now at your disposal is the culmination of all of the world's thoughts and perspectives on parenting available at your fingertips on the World Wide Web. That's all the answers are right there for you, right at your fingertips. You can search the web and social media, and you today, right now, can find the answer to your most pressing dilemma as a parent. Yet, when you begin to search the web and buy all the books, as every parent has, and Renee and I certainly have, what you actually discover is an endless stream of parenting fads, hopelessly contradictory views and perspectives on parenting that are either difficult to understand or even absurd. So what kind of parent should I be? God's given us this gift as a child. What kind of parent should I be? Should I be a lighthouse parent? Should I be a gentle parent? Should I be a tiger parent? An authoritative parent? An authoritarian parent? A permissive parent? A helicopter parent? A snowplow parent? A free-range parent? maybe an attachment parent. A parent that embraces boundaries parenting. That's the deal. What about a conscious parent? Just conscious. Danish parent? I mean, I think they've figured some things out, so maybe we should look there. Or a jellyfish parent. Have you heard of this one? Now, of those 14 styles of parenting, if none of those 14 styles of parenting don't do it for you, don't worry. There are over 60,000 books on parenting at Amazon right now for you to choose from. So, good luck out there. Well, at Fellowship Denver, we are currently in a short teaching series on the book of Proverbs called Relationships of Wisdom. And in this series, we are highlighting various types of critical interpersonal relationships. And Proverbs, of course, is a book of wisdom in the Old Testament. And what we're learning is that there are critical elements and insights of wisdom that you can apply in these critical relationships that we all have to develop a strong community together. So we've looked at the relationship between children to parents, the relationship between husband and wife. How do you apply wisdom in that relationship? And we talked about that last week. The relationship of friendships. What does it mean to have companion? And what does it mean to actually have friends? And what does it mean to apply wisdom in those contexts of friendships, which are critical and necessary for growth? And in all of these relationships, we are simply highlighting what Proverbs shows us in terms of how to apply wisdom. And today we are looking at the relationship between parents to children, between parents to kids. So here's what we're going to learn today. I'm just going to give you just a brief summary of what's coming. What we're going to learn today is that Proverbs does give us time-tested wisdom for parenting. What we're going to find today is not faddish, but it is solid. And it is trustworthy. Even though parenting is tough, and I think some of the stats that are recently coming out, I resonate, feels about right. Even though parenting is tough, it is nevertheless a sacred calling. And it's something with God's help, with God's guidance, in the context of God's family, we can, as parents, learn to do better. Now, if you're here this morning and if you're a disciple of Jesus, if you trust Jesus and if God's given you the gift of children, this is kind of how I want to coach you how to think through today's sermon. Learning how to parent with wisdom is actually a key way to live out your devotion to God and how to embrace his calling on your life. At least part of his calling on your life is to be a parent. So it's a key element of discipleship. Now, if you're here this morning, and if you're a parent, but you're not a disciple of Jesus, you're maybe exploring what Jesus has to say, and sort of still processing what you believe about God, Jesus, and the Bible, let me just say we're so happy that you're here. But if this is you, how are you to sort of process a sermon like this? And this is kind of what I would encourage you to think about. Learning to parent with wisdom is a key way that we strengthen communities. And so even if you're not sure what you think about the Bible, my encouragement is to track along and see if this actually doesn't resonate with your experience. Now, for those of you who are non-parents in this room, how do you track along with a message like this? Well, here's my encouragement to you. If you're not a parent, chances are you're friends with parents. Chances are you're connected to parents, and your presence actually in their life is really important. We just said that one of the key elements and frustrations of parenting is isolation and feeling by themselves. And so your engagement with and understanding of this topic could be really helpful and useful to your friends who are parents. And within the context of this church, we're a part of the family of God. And all of us who are part of the family of God, we all get to participate in guidance and in raising our kids. We have 3 boys who've been raised in this church, and many of you have been significant influences on their lives. Many of you who yourselves don't have kids, but you have been very significant influences on your lives. So my encouragement to you, if you don't have kids, track along and lock in. This is really important for you to embrace what it means to be a part of God's family. Okay, here we go. Now, when we look at all the verses in Proverbs about parenting, and there are numerous, and we're going to look at a handful of them, but when you look at all of them, the one thing all of these verses have in common is a particular responsibility that parents have, which is discipline. Discipline. You see it all throughout Proverbs. Proverbs 13:24 puts it this way. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Now you notice the irony in this verse. It's really beautifully written, because you would think if you used the rod, and we'll just describe what rod means in a minute, but you think you used the rod, then that must mean that you dislike the child, and it's actually the opposite. Whoever spares the rod, doesn't use it, hates his child. But he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Not disciplining is a form of hatred, actually. The word rod here, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it is used both metaphorically and literally in the Old Testament. But the outcome of the rod in the context of parenting is that it actually is used as an initiating discomfort in the short term to alter behavior, to alter default ways of thinking that will, without being altered, would lead to destruction. So you have to use it. Another proverb, Proverb 29:17, puts it this way. Discipline your son, and he will give you rest, and he will give delight to your heart. So you notice that discipline your child, that he will give you rest. And this idea now is being written from a parent who is now elderly, older. He will give delight to your heart. And so you kind of put some of these verses together and you kind of get a composite theme that goes something like this. Parents are responsible for correcting, reproving, and disciplining their children so that their kids can learn to see the difference between wisdom and folly. So that the child can actually learn to know what is the path to become wise themselves. The exercise of discipline is always done as an expression of love. So you discipline out of love with an outcome that is long-term, that produces a life in the child that actually gives the parent delight in their old age. That's the big idea. Now, another key element happens in the context of this relationship. There's actually a virtue that's taught from parent to child that we see throughout Proverbs and the whole Bible. And this virtue is called prudence. Prudence, a way to think about what prudence is the capacity to have the right amount of fear in any situation or context you happen to be in. Prudence isn't having too much caution or too much fear. Prudence isn't having not enough caution or not enough fear. It's having just the right amount of caution and the right amount of fear in any situation, whether at work or at home, any situation a kid might eventually be in. Prudence is knowing and having the right amount of fear. I'll give you an example of it. Our kids, we're a bike commuting family. We have one car, and we've just sort of raised our kids to be bike commuters to school since they were little, and I'm a bike commuter, and here's the thing about learning to ride bikes commuting style in the city. Here's one thing you learn: drivers are crazy. Drivers are nuts out there, right? So you need to have some fear when you're riding your bike. Now, there are certain intersections, and through time you learn to recognize certain behaviors in drivers and cars that will heighten an appropriate amount of fear that then you can ride your bike in such a way to prevent any harm from happening. Now, the capacity to learn to have the right amount of fear and that kind of discernment so that you can ride your bike and have fun in a safe way, what is required is the virtue of prudence. That is taught within the context of parent and child, within the broader theme of discipline. Several months ago, when we were preaching through another small series in the book of Proverbs about the heart needs wisdom, we had a sermon and actually preached this sermon entitled "The Heart Needs Discipline." And in that sermon, we actually learned that not just children need discipline, but all of us, we're all children once, that actually all of us need discipline. Everyone needs discipline, and we learned throughout that study of Proverbs that without discipline, and this is without sort of the act of being disciplined and without being a disciplined person, so kind of the two ways of using that word, without discipline, actually in a real significant sense, without discipline, it actually leads to death. And we learned that without discipline, we die. We might die morally. We might find death relationally with important people in our lives. And sometimes, Proverbs mentions, without discipline, we might actually literally die. We choose a path of life that will lead to an untimely death. Proverbs says that without discipline, we die. But the relational context, even in that sermon we learned, in which we begin to receive discipline and start becoming disciplined, self-controlled people, is in the sacred relationship between parent and child. Okay, so what is discipline then? Now, discipline is this, and when you look at the Hebrew word that's used in all these passages, the Hebrew word for discipline is actually the word bond, or a link in a chain. It's a restraint. And the idea is that discipline is restraining impulses, habits, and wrong ways of thinking that without restraining those behaviors and impulses and wrong ways of thinking, those behaviors would actually lead to harm. So discipline is restraining those impulses, habits, wrong ways of thinking that lead to harm, so that, here's the big idea, so that you're free and your child is free to pursue habits and behaviors and ways of thinking that lead to life and abundance. That's what discipline is meant to do. It's actually not meant just as a restraint. It's actually meant to provide freedom. So, that's discipline. Now, I bet my hunch is, at this point in the sermon, I probably haven't said anything that's too controversial. Most people, I think, would agree that disciplining children and learning restraint is actually really important to have a flourishing life. Most people would agree that parents are uniquely positioned to provide and initiate discipline in the lives of their children. Most people would agree with that. In fact, after the sermon in the first service, I had a pediatrician come up to me and he said, "Hey, just so you know, that sermon was pediatrician approved." See? I didn't even read that. I didn't even know that. It's just the Bible, right? Now, but the real question, this is where the controversy comes in, is everyone agrees that discipline's needed. The real question is, how do you apply discipline? How do you enact discipline? And this is where the church and the rest of society begin to break up in factions. All you have to do is Google, like I did yesterday, Is it okay to spank my child? Just, you can dive right into years and decades of hotly contested, competing research projects and ideas within the Christian world and within the broader world of how to raise children, child psychology. And you'll find just about anything. If you're looking for something to justify what it is you already believe, you'll find it. It's all out there with your own research to back it up. So you can find whatever you're looking for, okay? But this is where the question is. We all agree discipline's needed. How do you begin to apply it? Proverbs gives us two ways to apply discipline that I think are really critical. And I'm just going to share both of them with you. All right. The first way to apply discipline is this. You apply discipline with skill. With skill. And I want you to underline or write skill. Skill is a learned behavior that requires intelligence and practice. Okay, it requires skill. A lot of what Proverbs is about is teaching us how to live skillfully. So if you're going to embrace, we have to discipline our children, then how you apply it requires skill. Now, here's why it requires skill. Because there's two things that are true at the same time that when you push them together lead to a lot of tension. Number one is this. We read about it in Proverbs 22:15. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. So folly, we've learned through teaching through Proverbs, folly is behavior that is associated with a particular path or a way of life that will ultimately lead to destruction and harm and diminishment and the opposite of flourishing. And so, but here it says that folly is bound up, it's intertwined, it's entangled in the heart of a child. So the children who we love, the children who God has given you, you've now discovered, probably experientially, the reality of this. Early on, realizing that your child who you love, who doesn't mean you can't learn from. Children are actually honored in the New Testament, in the context of the family of God. And yet, also, because of the nature of the fall and how sin works in society and in individuals, folly is particularly bound up in the heart of a child. You see this early on with little kids and toddlers. If you don't believe me, just man the door after church today and see how many toddlers just try to run out on South Broadway. And they're doing it because it seems fun to them, because they like to see their parents suffer. But you'll see it every Sunday. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Occasionally, I'll be by the door and I'll just catch a toddler. The reason why they do that is that folly is bound up. And so to not do anything, to not correct, to not provide discipline is harmful for the child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. So it requires discipline, a sternness to correct. You have to have that because it's folly that's bound up in the heart of the child, not wisdom, not purity, not insight. It's folly. And so you have to have the rod of discipline. And again, the word rod here is used both literally and metaphorically. And I will get into corporal punishment here in just a second. But it's needed because folly is bound up. Hands off is not an option. All right. But that's just one part of the tension. always bound up in the heart of the child. There's another truth that you place right next to it, and you have to place it next to it. If you don't, you don't get the biblical insight. If all you have is that, you don't quite get the biblical insight. And the second truth is that children are tender. Proverbs 4:3, this is the writer of Proverbs reflecting when he was just a child. And notice the description he used to describe himself. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother. Of all the words he could use to describe himself when he was really young, he uses the word tender. And that tender in Hebrew is another translation would just mean soft, bruisable, squishy. I want you to think of the image of an avocado. I'm serious. Think of an avocado right now. Now, anytime you go to the grocery store and you buy avocados, what do you have to do? You got to feel those things, right? Some are super squishy, like they were ripe, 3 days ago, and they kind of really squishy. And others are a little bit firmer, and take a few days to get ripe. And what Proverbs is saying is that children are like avocados, easily bruisable, tender. And now hopefully you're beginning to feel the tension of why skill is the primary word when it comes to applying discipline. Skill is required. It's not some mindless, well, that's how we did it when I grew up. Now, maybe how you grew up, maybe that's the right way to do it. Just saving some emails. Now, but skill is required because, just like when you go to the grocery store, not every avocado has the same measure of tenderness. Those of you who have multiple kids have probably learned this by now. The one way, an effective way to discipline a child, if you have a one-size-fits-all approach, it doesn't work for the second or the third kid. So it requires skill because your child is tender. Like an avocado, bruisable. And so here is the necessity for a skillful application of discipline. Your child, even though they're bruisable, even though they're tender, they still have foolishness bound up in their heart. And so it still requires a rod of discipline. And yet how you use that rod, and whatever the term rod means, here's the fruit of it when you know you're doing it right. The Bible assumes that parenting itself and its application of discipline is applied with wisdom, which cuts out absurd excesses and abuses of parenting, even styles that may have a Bible verse written next to it. And so whatever rod means, if it's physical discipline or if that's used metaphorically to indicate the role of important reproof and more creative ways of discipline, whatever rod means, it needs to work as a deterrent to foolishness, while not itself being an act of hasty foolishness. It needs to work to deter foolishness while not itself being an act of hasty foolishness. What's interesting is that the word rod is used again. The same person who wrote that they were tender, they would begin to use that term rod again, but it's actually used not and thought of not as something that's an introduction of something that brings terror, but actually comfort. We read about it in Psalm 23, and he puts it this way. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so the rod is necessary. The rod of discipline drives out foolishness. But we apply it with skill so that that child, even though maybe during the application of the rod doesn't like it, that very soon after that rod is associated with comfort, not harm. So, how do you apply discipline? With skill. The second way you apply discipline is this. You apply discipline always with the future in mind. Every time discipline is mentioned in Proverbs, it always has some future result in mind. It is not a way to solve some short-term temporary frustration. It is a way to actually create a context which long-term is beneficial for the child. So I'm going to read a proverb right now. I'm going to read the first line, which is good and easy to understand. I'm also going to read the second line, which might trigger some of you. Although some of you laughed at it when we were reading it earlier, so maybe this is funny. Okay, so discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. Okay, that's the second part. Oh, so let's look at the first part, and I'll explain the second part. The first part, discipline your son, for there is hope. Hope is all about future. The role of discipline is always to be used in such a way that puts your child on a projection to become a certain kind of person. It is not a way of fixing some short-term frustration you may be experiencing as a parent per se, okay? It's always about the future. Discipline your son, for there is hope. Discipline brings hope. And now, the second part here, do not set your heart on putting him to death. Now, there are clear commands, just to be clear, there are clear commands in the Old Testament against murder. And so is the writer of Proverbs really saying that there are some parents who are contemplating putting their child to death because they're so frustrating? Okay, probably not. Probably not. There's one case that maybe so, but probably not, because there's clear commands against that kind of behavior. So then what is the writer of Proverbs saying? Most scholars believe the writer of Proverbs is saying something like this. Discipline your son, for there's hope. And if you don't discipline, that's the sort of subtext, reading between the lines. If you don't discipline, like if you say, I can't deal with this kid anymore, and just pull your hands back, and so you don't engage with it, then practically speaking, you're allowing them to continue on a path of folly that in Proverbs leads to death. And so functionally, when you don't discipline, you're setting your heart, you keep putting your hands up, and it's going to lead to their destruction. So I'm pretty sure, I'm about 80% sure that that's what that second line means, okay? Just being honest. Okay, but that's all about the future. So do I discipline my child, not just for a temporary benefit, but for a benefit for my child to become a certain kind of person? There is the rule of 10 that maybe some of you have heard of in decision making, and I actually think this is a helpful kind of application of the rule of 10 here. The rule of 10 goes like this. If I make this decision, will I be happy about it in 10 minutes? Will I be okay with it in 10 months? Will I be proud of this decision in 10 years? It's the rule of 10 in decision making. I think when it comes to parenting with future in mind, the same rule can be applied with how you apply discipline. Is this good in 10 minutes? Is this good in 10 months? Is this good in 10 years? You see, disciplining children when they're young, it does start with behavioral modification. Reference the toddlers that run out to South Broadway. I'm not concerned about their heart condition when they're heading out to South Broadway. I just want to alter their behavior. And disciplining children when they're young kind of starts with that. But then it morphs into teaching kids to know what the right things are. And it begins to develop into what Hunter talked about last week, which was a passage about a mother teaching her son to desire a woman of character. And so discipline starts with behavior modification, but then it's beginning to teach them what the right things are, begin to inspire and create a thirst for wisdom in their own life. All of that has a projection of the future in mind. Proverbs 22:6 says this. It's a famous verse. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, some parents, older parents, were taught this particular verse in a particular way that was like a guarantee. Like if you train your kids using X, Y, and Z styles of child rearing, then it will kind of guarantee that when they're old, they're going to believe this stuff. And many of us have discovered that's not the case. Okay? So what is this talking about? Well, train up, the word train up just means to dedicate. So it's the whole way in which we raise our kids. In the way is not just talking about a particular style of parenting, it's actually talking about raising your kids in the context of the community of God. In the way he should go, so that when he is old, he will not depart from it. So as parents, this is sort of a principle for us to apply. It is not a guarantee. You maybe as parents might do everything right, and because your child eventually has their own volition, they may or may not choose to stay with it, or they may choose to depart from it. And yet the principle here, and this is what's really important, is that as a parent, however it is that you apply discipline, you need to think, am I disciplining my child so that they will behave now? Or so that, because if it's behave and if it's heavy-handed, then what we've learned over and over and over again is that when they get freedom or they get out of the house, it's peace out, mom and dad. Peace out, right? So this is a perspective of the long haul. Like train up a child so that with the long view in mind, when they are older, they won't depart from it. So are we raising our kids in such a way that they begin to see the insight and the wisdom that actually what I'm learning in church and what I'm learning from my family is making more sense of the world than the stuff that I'm getting at school and other places. So it creates confidence so that when they are old, they will not depart from it. So all of this has the future in mind. When you apply discipline, have the future in mind. Which means that as a parent, you get to have strategic, throughout wherever it is your kid is right now, you get to have strategic moments where you get to speak words of correction at critical moments in your kid's life that will change the course for better. That's the idea. But it's long term, not short term. And it's done long term in the context of community. Ephesians 6:4 says this. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. The bring them up is a phrase to describe not just how it is that you discipline and how it is you discipline and give instruction, but where you do it. You do it up in the context of community. You do it in the context of the church. Remember what the number one issue that parents today are facing? The number one thing that's causing them harm and making parenting hazardous? It's parenting in isolation and parenting that causes profound loneliness. And I want to be just really clear to parents out here. If you have a kid right now, I get you may be feeling some of this. I just want to be really clear with you. That should not be the case with you. You maybe feel isolated and lonely, but in the context of this community, if you raise up your child, bring them up in the discipline of the Lord, teach them the way, you get to do it in the context of community. And there are other people right now who would love to invest in you and invest in your kids. I mean, my kids this weekend, I have no idea where they are. I literally have no idea where they are. But it's because they're at a youth ski trip. And they spent the weekend learning, being brought up in the way of the Lord because other adults who aren't parents are investing in them, giving them guidance and perspective, and providing real help to me as the parent and to Renee as well, relieving some of that burden so that we're not alone and isolated. And this is what the church, when it's working rightly, this is what it provides. And so, how do we apply discipline? We do it with skill. How do we apply it? We do so with the future in mind. Friends, parenting is hard. It's really hard. And I think it's true that at times it is hazardous for your health. And yet God, if you're a parent, God's called you to it. If you're friends with parent, if you're a part of the church, this is your responsibility as well. And here in just a minute, we're going to be reminded that we all need grace. All of us fall short in this. We need grace. And yet, where we find grace is from a father who is himself a perfect father to us. Proverbs 3:11 says this: "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be wary of his reproof. The Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." You see, our Father is perfect, and he disciplines perfect. He relates to us in a way that's perfect. But you and I, we're not. We fall short. We need grace. And here in just a minute, when we go to the table, we are reminded that at the cross, through the broken body of Jesus and his blood poured out, we actually can experience fresh forgiveness and mercy so that we can be renewed into the calling that God has given us. So let's pray. God, I thank you for today. And I thank you that your word speaks directly to very real issues and tensions that many of us in this room are facing right now. Thank you for speaking so directly to it and giving us wisdom and insight. God, I pray for parents who are frustrated right now, who are just in the doldrums of parenting and wondering if anything that they're saying or doing is making a difference in their kids' lives. I just pray that you would encourage them. I pray that your gospel and your grace and your truth would renew them and restore them, give them renewed energy. God, I pray for parents who did the best they could, but a sermon like this might strike as frustrating or even depressing. God, I pray you would protect them. I pray that they would find significant joy and meaning in the gospel and in being a part of this family of God. And God, I thank you ultimately that we can relate to you as our good Father. We can trust you. And we thank you for Jesus and for what he provided for us on the cross to bring us back into reconciliation and relationship with you. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.